Welcome back. We're going to continue talking about barriers to communication, and here we're going to talk about cross-cultural communication barriers as we finish up this module for week 5. Now, as you could hear probably in my introduction, this is one of my favorite lectures that we'll have through the whole term. I love thinking about how we might communicate well with those of other nations, those of other languages, those of other people groups, particularly because of the gospel impact it has on the Great Commission. For those of you that have taken short-term mission trips, I'm sure that you will agree with me that the fact that there are brothers and sisters around the globe that worship the same Christ that we do, that worship the same God that we do, is tremendous. And that is unifying. The fact that I have more in common with brothers and sisters in Christ who are living in the widely viewed as the most persecuted country in the world for Christians in North Korea. The fact that I have more in common with them than I do with my neighbor next door who does not know Christ is tremendous. And if that is the case, if that is true, which we believe in Christ that it is true, then we need to be able to communicate well with those who look different than us, who talk different than us, who speak a different language than us. We still need to be able to communicate well, that we might encourage one another with the gospel, or if it's someone who has never heard the gospel, that we might be able to communicate well with them. This is true in our business dealings. If we have people that are different than us in our organization, we need to be able to communicate well with them, for that is a picture of the gospel in the work setting to those who would not, who do not currently believe. So what are these cross-cultural communication barriers that we need to overcome if we're going to communicate well across cultural barriers? One is semantics. Words mean different things to different people. So even when you're working through a translator, the fact that words can mean different things to different people is challenging. We want to avoid slang. We want to avoid words that have multiple connotations, because as we can see on the second point, word connotations, words imply different things in different languages. So be careful, be mindful of how you speak and what words you use, so as to not cause offense when you are working in cross-cultural contexts. There are tone differences. In some cultures, a tone change can change the word. Tones can change depending on the context. And so be mindful of what you getting excited might mean in a certain culture. Perhaps that means that you are coming across abrasive and mean. Perhaps that comes across exactly like you wanted to, that you are excited about the work that's being done. Be mindful of how tone can be interpreted different in different cultures. There are different worldviews. There are different religious worldviews. There are different political worldviews. So be mindful of those different worldviews in how you are communicating with people, and don't assume that there are similarities where there might not be. Lastly, the use of figurative language. Phrases can have hidden meaning that native speakers understand, and even second language speakers might miss. So if it's raining really hard and you're in a cross-cultural setting, you probably don't want to say to an interpreter, "It's raining cats and dogs out here." They're not going to know what you mean. They're not going to know how to interpret that for the native speaker around you. So there are cross-cultural barriers that we need to overcome. There are also cultural contexts that we need to be mindful of. Some cultures are very high context cultures. This can be many Asian countries, many Middle Eastern and North African countries, where there is a lot of there's a lot of history, there's a lot of expectation, there's a lot of cultural context that we would want to be mindful of so as to not unnecessarily cause offense. Then there are very low context cultures relying essentially on words to convey meaning. So much of Europe, USA, Canada, even most of Central and South America. Those are very low context cultures where we're going to focus on the words, not necessarily the subtleties of context to convey meaning. So if you find yourself in cross-cultural context, be thinking about the different cultures that people are coming from and know if there is a lot of context that you need to be aware of, or if you can rely on straightforward words to get meaning across. There's a little bit of a cultural guide here, a way to kind of think through cross-cultural context. This is good in work settings. It's good in short-term mission trips. It's good across the board if you find yourself interacting with people in your own community that maybe are in a different cultural context than you are. Assume that there is differences until a similarity is proved. So don't assume a similarity until a difference is proved that it exists. Assume that there's differences and be eager and yearn to find out what those are because you want to celebrate their culture well. Emphasize description rather than interpretation or evaluation. Description comes across very well across cultures when we're describing things rather than interpretation or evaluation. Those things can get into some of those high context cultural realities where something that would be praised in America may not be praised in Thailand. And so emphasize that description, especially as you're first getting to know your cultural context. Practice empathy. You want to be a sponge for this other nation, this other country, this other culture, and be empathetic, not antagonistic, not thinking that the culture you're coming from is automatically better than the other culture, but be loving and presenting with empathy towards those you're around. And then treat your interpretation as a working hypothesis. This is extremely helpful, that you're not hearing something and running with all the implications that you think that is, but treat it as a hypothesis. If I understood you right, this is kind of what I'm thinking, and let them confirm or correct any understandings that have gone off the rails there. So we're going to close our time together to have a quick discussion post talking about a misinterpreted email as we talk about that barrier to communication, right? The written communication having some of the failings that can come there. So we want to spend some time applying that and going through some of this material together in the discussion post. So I hope everyone does well with that, and I'll see you next week.